Welcome to the Procurement Software Podcast, where we aim to educate and inspire you about how technology is changing and shaping our profession. The truth is, there's never been a more exciting time to be in procurement, but only if you're one of those organizations that's embracing the change and driving new developments. And this podcast is all about giving you the tools to help you get there. So buckle up and let's get right into this week's show. Yes, a very warm welcome to another episode of the Procurement Software Podcast. Today, my guest is Matthew Spencer, and he is founder and CEO of a new startup that is changing the way that we look at supplier performance and revolutionizing approach to that topic. So really excited to get into the conversation today. It's not very often that we have pretty young companies on the show. So really hope we can elevate a little bit some new innovation in this space and show the world what Matthew's doing with his new company. So Matthew, very warm welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, James. Really happy to be here.
So let's jump in. You're at the moment still working for your existing employer, and you've built this as a bit of a side project with their blessing. So I'm keen to dig into that. But before we do, just give us a quick overview of your background to date, because you're one of the rare breed of founders that actually is a procurement practitioner. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about your story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm starting my career always in the industrial sector. So straight out of doing supply chain management in my master's degree, I went to the Volvo Group where I was on a graduate program before now for almost 5 years being at Bekaert Group, which is basically steel wire transformation, market and technology leaders for all different types of complex applications. So you see it all around you. You just don't know that it's there typically. And there I was leading at first supplier relations, risk and compliance, then the supplier management and sustainability center of excellence. And then most recently, I lead the global PMO within procurement. So I do that alongside of FlockScore, of course. Yeah.
Okay, so pretty well qualified then in terms of your background. If you've been at the cutting edge of center of excellence and supplier management stuff within Bekaert. So tell me then, in a couple of sentences, what FlockScore does. If I was a primary school student, how would I be able to understand really easily what you do?
Okay, that's a tough one. But to make it really, really simple, imagine you're a primary school student. I would say for children, it's like today it's all about video games, right? So as a child, imagine that you want to choose what video game you're going to ask for Christmas now. The first thing that you'd do is you'd go and search online for reviews. What are your friends or other children saying is the best game, and why? Does it match your interest? So FlockScore is doing a bit the same, but in industrial supply chains. So when companies are looking at what do we want to buy, which supplier do we want to buy from, they're able to see the same things. So what should I expect when I work with this supplier? Are they going to meet my expectations and requirements? So in a nutshell, that's a little bit the same kind of comparison. And the key point is, what we're doing is we're making it open to everybody. So just like how in the B2C world, you can check the reviews of different games quite freely, we're also making it so that procurement teams can access this data in an open way. They share their data. So what's their experience? And in exchange, they can also view the collective experience with that supplier.
I would have understood that. I think if I was if I was 7 or 8 years old. So what was it that gave you the itch to move from having a steady corporate job to wanting to build a software startup? What was the aha moment that got you to that point?
Yeah, I'm often one of these strange ones because we're also in an accelerator start at KBC in Belgium. And everybody in the group was mentioned how they wanted to start their own business. But actually, I never said I want to be an entrepreneur. But for me, it was just a big gap. And I can say 2 different angles. The first one was when we were building our roadmap. We were talking about digitalization. Where do we want to be on a 5-year horizon? This was now 4 years or so ago. And the first thing our aim was, we want to make our internal supplier scorecarding process better. So we want to make more meaningful scorecards. We want to digitalize that process. And then I had put on our roadmap 3 years later, by then, with all the initiatives we see in transparency, surely there'll also be external data. Why can't we go further? So we put that on the roadmap. 3 years down the line, we reached that point. We had done the digitalization internally, and I look externally and it's just not there. And for me, it's crazy. So that drove me to say, like, there's a big gap here. I really think there should be something there. So let's build it. And what was the aha, which made me think this is really needed, was as a big company, looking at the difference between assessing supplier performance for one site versus assessing it at group level. So when you start to zoom out from one site, maybe that one site has had some anomaly, some issue, and they're highlighting this supplier has very bad quality because there has been maybe one issue that they've had. When you zoom out to a group level, perhaps what you actually see is the total volume you buy, actually this supplier is your top performing supplier for quality. There's one issue that you need to tackle as like complaint management, but as a whole, their quality is better than other suppliers. In fact, what we need to work with them on is their communication, because when we look at the bigger picture, that's the bigger issue. So you've gone from one site to your whole group as a big organization. And my aha moment was then, but we're still looking at a tiny fragment of data. What if we zoom out even further and say, what are the experiences of all companies working with that supplier? Why are we all pulling suppliers in a different direction and saying this is the most important thing for you to work on for performance? Why not bring that intelligence together and say, what is actually the biggest thing that is impacting the performance of that supplier that they should be focusing on? And that was for me where I saw we need this collective ecosystem-wide view.
Yeah, and even I like that, because even when you look at internal performance metrics between different sites within a business, you often, I have that experience as well, that we often had MRO suppliers in my previous employer that were group wide across all of Europe, and one site would love them and another would think that they're the devil incarnate. And it usually stemmed from people relationships, that if you had a bad relationship between their key account manager or their field salesperson and the maintenance team or the warehouse manager, the stores manager, that would often create friction. But the underlying metrics could often show a different picture. So yeah, I really get that. So if we look if we take a step back and we look at supplier relationship management more holistically, why do you think that performance management is often perhaps a little bit overlooked, especially some of the softer parts of that, when we, in comparison to some of the more compliance and due diligence related parts of supplier management, especially when it comes to, onboarding and making sure that's done in a compliant way?
Yeah, I think there's many different angles you can take on that, right? But I think it's definitely the case that you hit on, that it is a bit underrated. But I'd say there's two different elements of SRM that are more popular. There's a compliance due diligence part, which you mentioned, and that's because compliance always sells well, right? Also, if you have a business case internally, if you have to do something for compliance, then you need to do it. So typically that works quite well. And also on the lower end of supplier performance management, that also works, because obviously to be quality certified, you have to do some parts of supplier performance management, but that's not where you get the real value. The other part, which I think overshines the supplier performance management, is this collaboration and innovation part, just because it's a lot more exciting, right? And it's like, how can we co-create value with the suppliers, bring new products, etc. So these parts is either more exciting or it's really strong compliance driven. And supplier performance management sits a little bit there in the middle. And I think one reason why it's really underrated is because the value from it is hard to capture. There are different statistics out there which actually put a really big percentage on it that companies are losing because of poor supplier performance, but actually getting to those concrete savings, which we know is always a hot topic in procurement, is very difficult for supplier performance. But I would challenge anybody in this area, really do a little bit of digging under the surface. And what I can say from my experience, you start to see that there are a lot of, let's say, soft buffers throughout organizations, which when you tot up the cost of these are actually humongous. They have just been built into the business over time and people do not realize. So there is a massive value there to be captured in most companies today.
So you've actually done this then in your current role. Walk me through what you think a good supplier scorecard then should look like.
Yeah, I think the one thing is it has to be specific to the company and the category. So the first point, I gave a speech on this recently with 3 elements, but the absolute base point that you have to get is that you're giving meaningful feedback to the supplier. And that feedback should actually be very closely tied to what are your objectives as a business. but also closely tied to the reality of what is the category that supplier is operating in. If you end up with 2 standardized scorecards, which you're doing more on your side to, tick the box, you won't have good results. So the first base point is you have to be getting meaningful feedback, which based on the results matters for your business, but it's also very relevant for the supplier's business as well.
It's relevant to the category as well, though, isn't it? I mean, if evaluating CapEx or MRO suppliers the same way that you'd evaluate an IT or a marketing supplier is a bit of a fool's game.
Absolutely. And even I would say, even within industrial goods, raw materials, there are even certain raw materials where you expect a certain, percentage defect rate or issue within that. And there are others which is more just like, is it okay? Is it not okay? Like any issue is a problem. So you even have to sometimes go down to quite a detailed subcategory level to understand, what is the dynamics of that specific thing that you're purchasing to make sure that the feedback you give needs to drive action, right? The end result should always be that it's driving action. And the other angle on top of the categories, like you mentioned, is also the level of the relationship with that supplier. So you don't evaluate all suppliers. That's really important that you focus on critical ones. But if you're having a partner versus a supplier who's perhaps your competition, your backup for that commodity, still important, it's quite different. You need to make sure in that partnership element that you're also capturing not just the data elements, but also qualitative feedback of your stakeholders. How is the collaboration going? The ideas being generated and these kind of topics.
Yeah, and that soft supplier performance management, I mean, you're not the only one that's doing it. I mean, there are others out in the space that sort of take this into consideration, but it is often overlooked. And even though it's not a hard KPI, if you've got unhappy stakeholders when it comes to suppliers, you're going to know about it. And it's important that that's part of the overall factor. How do you get then people on board within the business to actually engage with that process? What drives them to be interested? What can you do to bring them on board?
Yeah, I think there's 2 important elements there for me. The first one is the prerequisite, and that is making sure that you're selecting the right suppliers to evaluate. So if you overburden your stakeholders asking them to evaluate every supplier that they work with, then the engagement's going to drop off. So the first thing is get the right suppliers. If you've got the right suppliers, I actually think getting the business stakeholders engaged is pretty easy because they actually care also about those suppliers and they want their feedback to be heard, right? Everybody likes their opinion to be heard. So they get engaged. So I'd say more the tricky nuance there is getting them engaged in the right way, right? So you don't want people just to be, taking an opportunity to bash on the supplier, right? When you ask them for their feedback. So you need to frame it in the right way and a little bit coach people, especially in the case of qualitative feedback where they have a bit more flexibility in how to actually evaluate the supplier in an appropriate and fair way. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I like that. So let's dig into a little bit then to what you've built, just to try and explain to any of the listeners how your approach is, somewhat different to what's already out there when we look at SRM software.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you called it when we were doing our prep call, you called it an open contribute to access model. What do you actually mean by that? Let's break that down.
Yeah. This is quite unusual. Yeah. So I can talk about it for a long time. But what we said when we started out is that this is procurement for procurement. And the future of AI, it's all about data, right? We need to get better quality data to drive agentic AI decision making. But we cannot just keep buying more and more and more and more data, right? We need to work more together on it. So our model, open contribute to access, what it really means is every procurement team can participate in FlockScore free of charge, straight into the system.
That's important. So there's no cost initially for a buying organization to sign up and use the platform.
No, absolutely not. So you can sign up and start working in 5 minutes. No subscriptions, no fees. Yeah. And that's the contribute to access. So as soon as you sign in, you will have a starting amount of credit. So you could look in the system. But to keep using it, you do have to contribute your data. And this is contribute to access. When the companies share their data, so exactly as you have it today on your supplier performance, whether it's decentralized and you're doing individual reviews, you put them straight in the platform. Or if you have a centralized team and you have some sort of database, you share that in bulk. And in exchange for each supplier, today, the credit ratio we give, for each supplier that you upload a scorecard data point for, you get 2 credits back, which is enough to monitor that supplier for 12 months. So you get an ecosystem-wide view for all of your suppliers, and also 1 extra for every supplier that you add, which means that you can also, for every new sourcing event you're doing, check out those new suppliers you've not worked with to see what actually is their performance with other existing customers.
Interesting. So I guess if I look at this from an example that I'm familiar with, it's a little bit like, instead of using Airbnb, it's a little bit like using those home share websites where you swap homes with people in different locations. And because you're not necessarily going to want to swap the same homes, it's on a credit-based system that when you host, you get credits. And when you stay somewhere, you spend credits. So yeah, I get that if I explain it that way. So I guess the $1 million So I guess the $1 million question is, let's assume that I'm a head of procurement and I'm on board with this, but to be able to share my supplier data, I'm probably going to get some pushback from IT or from legal. How do you remove that roadblock?
Yeah. So it is something that we get, right? But what I also want to say, actually, before I answer the question, is that I see 2 distinct groups. You have the one group who straight away is like, yeah, we need to be careful on this because it's sensitive data. And we also have another group who basically say, yeah, but I understand. And to be honest, what you're asking for is not that sensitive. So it depends on where the company is in their maturity journey with transparency. How many initiatives have they already participated in? So they really understand the bounds of what is sensitive for their company or not. If they're in that group where they feel a bit still concerned, then we're doing several things. So first thing is we reassure them on how we work in the platform. So we never ask for any additional data. There's definitely no personal data, but we don't ask for any additional data than what we need in the system. And what we do when we get the data from the companies, if they give it us in bulk, obviously we first sign an NDA, we complete any cybersecurity assessments that they need us to complete, then they share their data. We normalize it, which basically means that immediately from that stage, the way that the results are shown are not differentiable from any other company. We anonymize it, so we take away the names of the company and we aggregate it together with all the others. So what in the end is visible in the system has absolutely no tie back to the company that has shared the data in the beginning. So there is effectively zero risk for the companies that are contributing.
So you would know where the data's come from, but any other customer using the platform would have no way of being able to trace whose data is what. So there's no way then that you could give a competitor some advantage by knowing that you got a chronic support performance metric with a mutual supplier, for example.
No, exactly. We cannot. And also in all of our agreements, it's made extremely clear of how we use the data only ever in an aggregated format. And even to build security at the foundation, we store the source, obviously, for auditability, because we need to, as a company, be credible in saying, we're not obviously making up reviews ourselves. So we need to have that. But we store it completely separately from the data which is shown in the platform. So imagine the absolute worst case scenario where we already have a lot of controls in place and some hacker gets into our system. They even still would not be able to see there in the database any names of the companies that contribute. So we have put the anonymity, the privacy of the contributors at the absolute foundation of the platform. And that's what it has been built on.
Okay, so now comes the inevitable but necessary AI question. You're a young company, so the platform is AI native. Walk me through what exactly you're doing with AI within FlockScore.
Yeah, you're right. Say AI native. So I don't know if there's anywhere in the platform that we don't use AI, right? Just like in our private lives, we use it everywhere that's possible. But the core element, and what today is quite easy to build thanks to the technology we have available, is that in all of our scorecards, we are also supplementing with AI predictive scoring, which means that we pull from all available public sources. We have very, very niche agents who are looking for a specific topic. For example, product recalls or production shutdowns or capacity issues. So we have trained them specifically to look for this type of content and to understand the nuance of what does that mean for the performance of the supplier? What does that mean in combination with some financial signals? So we have been able to train very micro level AI processes within our workflow so that in the end, all of these different small elements are building up to the overall score. We also use it in different things like in looking to ensure that we don't have duplicate suppliers in the system, linking parents and children, these kind of topics. So throughout the platform, it's used, even in tracking, for example, user behavior and to trace the reviews and verify the way that people are adding data. So I'd have to say throughout the platform, the biggest way we use it is really in bringing extra AI signals and also combining that together with the actual reviews so that you can see a summary of performance, which both gives you details, but without ever obviously being able to expose who has provided what input, etc. Really summarizing these are the key points for the performance of that supplier.
So I think I get it, but just to make sure that everyone that's listening to this is clear, what would you define then as your differentiating feature or approach that separates this from a, let's say, sort of regular or traditional SRM tool?
So we are actually super niche data exchange, right? So we are not competition for any of the other SRM tools. We're not aiming to be your SRM platform. We are basically the data that you need for supplier performance. So our differentiator is really that it's open, accessible for all procurement teams and for all partners that want to use the data. So I would say the scale and the model is really our differentiator.
So in essence, then it could even perhaps connect into other existing SRM tools to enhance what they have in their system. If you wish to do that as a business model, I'm not saying you do, but it could potentially.
Exactly. This is in fact our vision, James, exactly. So we want to be partner agnostic. So we want our data to actually be able to be consumed and used wherever procurement teams need it. So whether that's your S2P solution, your risk solution, your SRM solution, we want our data to be available where you use it. So we are looking. So if there are other solutions looking at this and they say, yeah, we could really use this data, we're open to partnering there and making sure that, this is as useful for procurement teams as possible. Yeah.
So it's actually a very complementary piece of technology to existing risk management or SRM tools, depending on what the context is of what they're offering from a features perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. So let's talk a little bit then around what are some of the potential pitfalls of this approach. And I think the obvious ones that stand out to me, or certainly, when you were walking me through and showing me a demo, were some of the cultural and category differences when it comes to supplier scoring. So especially if we look at cultural differences around mindset, you've got some countries and cultures tend to have quite a negative glass half empty mindset, whereas others, Americans, seem to be very gung-ho and we can change the world and very, very positive glass half full. How do you account for that when you're looking at the way that the different companies or different regions would score suppliers across different regions?
Yeah. I think it's an important point because everybody scores differently, whether it's for cultural reasons or for another reason. I was just preparing an article together with one of our strategic advisors, and they gave a really good quote on that. And it's going to sound funny because we are actually a data company. But what they were saying was basically, it's really important to dig into the data and to go really deep on that. But don't only rely on the data, right? The data is directional. And that's also what we use here in the topic. So FlockScore is not about pinning down, this is the exact performance of this supplier on this characteristic and getting you to really the objective truth. Anybody who's worked on scorecards knows that, or I hope that they've got to that point where they realize it's not possible to get 100% accuracy, right? The important point that we need to strive for is trends and the direction. And then it's about conversations and taking action and follow up. So I don't see the differences in scoring from different companies and regions as a negative thing, actually. I think that it actually balances out to create the right view of trend. And what we see so far is that there can be some differences, of course, like in the levels and who in the case of qualitative scoring, at least, not the data scoring, when do you give like an 8 or a 10 or however you're doing your assessment? But directionally, companies regionally, people tend to be on the same page, right? Like, is it going in a bad direction or a good direction? You tend to see the same. So the key point with FlockScore, and that's also where the name comes from, the flock, right? Where you see a migration of birds, is that the direction shows the truth. You don't maybe get exactly the coordinates, but the direction is showing you the truth.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I would liken that a little bit to if you go on, I don't know, TripAdvisor US and then compare that to TripAdvisor Japan or Germany, you're going to get slightly different nuances in terms of how people rate hotels and restaurants and excursions and stuff. So yeah, I think that's fair. Between different categories, you're inevitably going to have, I mean, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but you're inevitably going to have somewhat different KPIs in terms of what they perceive to be important. You know, for IT, cybersecurity is going to be massive. For manufacturing, on time in full delivery performance is going to be massive. But both of those metrics are going to be pretty irrelevant to the other one. So how do you balance that? And how do you vary that from category to category?
Yeah. So our model is pretty simple, or our taxonomy. So we create big buckets, which gives the flexibility for these different categories of service to plot in what are the different things that you're measuring. So of course, it varies massively. And like I was mentioning earlier, even within manufacturing, it can vary what you track in quality. In some areas, even maybe you track like 3, 4, 5 KPIs just on quality. In other areas like on-site services, you put a big element on subcontractor safety. It can vary a lot. So what we actually do in our taxonomy, and when I was mentioned earlier, normalizing data, that we basically map whatever KPIs that company in that industry are working on to our higher level taxonomy, which gives it a star scoring in the end. So we have the flexibility to adapt to whatever's important for the companies. And this is what we actually put the emphasis on. We often get this question like, yeah, but what if another company is rating differently to me? They might rate different things, but every company with a decent scorecard is doing what's important to them. And understanding what's the performance that is important to this other company using your supplier is also very important. And all we do is map that into the general bucket. So you might measure something different for quality. We move that over, we normalize the scoring, and we move that over to the quality bucket. So we're flexible to accept whatever is measured in that specific combination of the industry, the category, and these kind of things.
So you can completely design it around category or what you want to measure. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. There's no standardization requested to work with FlockScore. This was important to us to reach, again, the scale, right? So there had been great transparency initiatives done, which were super intensive, took many years to do, where companies tried to standardize things. For supplier performance, I never personally believed this was going to work. We cannot make many companies evaluate suppliers in the same way. Instead, what we need to do is allow the flexibility to take the data exactly how the companies score today based on what's important to them.
Got it. Okay, so you've got an interesting road ahead. So the day that we're recording this is pretty much a week from when you actually officially launched the product. So you were in Lisbon last week for Web Summit. I really want to go, actually. I have to have a chat about that over a beer sometime. So that's really exciting. So you launched it officially last week at Web Summit in Lisbon. What are the next steps then, Matthew? How do you take it from here?
Yeah. So what it really means from last week is it means we've moved from our early access to our public open. So that means that anyone listening to this, you can go to the FlockScore website, flockscore.com, and click join the movement or get started for free, and immediately sign in to create your account. So we have opened the platform up after that early access period, and yeah, you can get started immediately. But what to actually expect? So this is, at the end of the day, it's important that we have strong networks. So our approach is targeting very small clusters in different industries. So right now we're very focused on heavy industry, and within there looking at some very heavy areas like forged and fabricated parts, these kind of things. So we will be outreaching to build really strong clusters, and then we will move to another cluster and another cluster. It doesn't mean that you cannot sign up and already start taking advantage of the platform, but we'll basically be putting an intense effort into building these different clusters, which eventually will grow to be a network within the industrial sector and then in future beyond.
Yeah, so I think you've kind of answered what I was going to ask you next, but that is what type of companies and what type of partners do you intend to work with? So I think you answered the first part in that you're going to be doing that with clusters. How do you look at then working with other partners within the industry?
Yeah. So any partners who want to collaborate with us, like I mentioned, we're partner agnostic. So do get in touch and we can have a conversation. But the first ones that we are really looking at is more the two-way. So any SRM solutions that also can contribute scorecard data because they have a scorecarding solution, for example, can have the possibility to share their data with us and in exchange load into their platform the FlockScores as well, basically. So it's a data by data exchange on the first ones. And then later we are already in conversations and we'll be looking to expand into different kind of AI solutions and like I mentioned, S2P solutions to plot in that data. But the first focus is where we can also bring data into our system.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned S2P because two of the things that typically source-to-pay platforms don't do particularly well because it's not their core product is contract management and supplier management. And the two are kind of linked, aren't they? If you've got a contract, then you want to measure supplier performance against it. So if that gives them a way of, or gives their customers the way of not having to go out and buy a separate point solution for that purpose, I mean, that's a way that they could retain that business potentially and have customers not look elsewhere. It's an exciting vision, Matthew. So I mean, if we look at this a little bit more philosophically, how do you think shared performance data could potentially reshape the culture of how we do, strategic procurement and supplier management?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think many ways, to be honest. But the first, thinking of some really practical examples to start with, I would say a lot of people perhaps listening, if they are in an industrial supply chain, you have a lot of difficulty today in getting internal stakeholders on board to develop new suppliers. Because to be honest, as procurement, we spend a lot of time trying to develop a new supplier. It might take a really long time and then it doesn't even pay off in the end and you have a supplier that's not performing that well. And the problem when you have those cases is that eventually your internal stakeholders become reluctant. They don't want to develop a new source because it's going to take a lot of time and they're not going to see the benefit. And then you start to lose value. I see what FlockScore is going to change there is it's going to reduce this barrier to getting started with having alternatives. It's going to make us much more agile because it's much faster, not just to find an alternative supplier. It's important to be able to find, is there one? But to also do this pre-screening to say, are they going to meet our expectations? So if they have poor performance, let's not even get started and waste our resources on assessments and audits, etc. But also, if the performance is a bit lower, is it in an area that matters to us? Like if we're looking for a supplier who's going to be supplying to us just in time and you see they have delivery issues, don't even get started, right? So you're able to be more effective in how you do supplier diversification. And basically, I believe it will make us much more agile as a profession to be able to move between the different suppliers that we're working with. The other element that I see, I think it's going to help us also on the supplier collaboration front. So at first, FlockScore obviously is very important for procurement teams, but we also believe that this scoring is going to be important for suppliers. So as a supplier, you're getting different feedback from different customers left, right, and center wanting all different things. What FlockScore is also aiming to do is give that supplier a common source of feedback. So from all of your customers, this is the important points, which they can also use in conversations with procurement and say, I understand your request to me, but if you see here, the total picture for us is this, where we have, the most feedback here. So we're going to be tackling this for the next 6 months. So we start to work together as an ecosystem and less of everybody asking different things to the same suppliers.
Okay, so just conscious of the time and we need to close this out. So final thought, what would you say to anyone listening to this that's still a little bit hesitant around sharing their data?
Yeah, I would say, and this advice I give to all companies who are signing up, if you are hesitant, get started with one of maybe your tier 3 categories. You don't have to upload all your data at once. Get started through the process with a category you feel is less sensitive. Upload it, work in the system for a bit, and I'm 100% certain that after we go through this cycle, you see the value, the process, you will have confidence actually that nothing sensitive is being lost here, and you'll be happy to share the rest of your data. So get started small. It's the same topic like with all transformation.
Okay, so quick fire round just to close this out. Don't think about these too much. Just a couple of fun questions to get to know you a little bit better. So first one, if money and location were no object, where in the world would you choose to live?
I'm really boring. I'm going to say Belgium, which is where we live right now. I don't think we'd move. I'm a boring guy. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the beer's good, I guess. And the chocolate. And then finally, well, I think you've probably answered that, but what's your guilty pleasure? The only rule here is you've got to keep it clean.
Okay. Well, I'm very focused on work at the minute, so I'd say my guilty pleasure is checking our LinkedIn page's follow account a little bit like stock prices. So if you're following this and you want to follow us. I'll definitely see it,
I love that. Okay, Matthew, it's been a pleasure. Great talking to you, and wishing you success. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, James. It's been great talking to you.
Okay, that was Matthew, and he is the CEO and founder of FlockScore. Where can they find you, Matthew, if they want to go out and have a look at what you're doing?
Yeah, so you can always go to flockscore.com where you can sign up immediately. Check us out on LinkedIn, page is FlockScore, or connect with me directly on LinkedIn, Matthew Spencer, at Bekaert and FlockScore. And
I will pop that all in the show notes. Thank you, as always, for listening. There are a lot of procurement podcasts out there now, so we're very grateful that you chose to insert us into your ears today on your morning run or commute or whatever it is you're listening to it. We will catch you again same time next month. Until then, take care and good luck with your 2026 budget planning, which I know is season at the moment. Catch you next time. Bye-bye for now.